Several years ago, I used to rent out a spare room in my home, which I would advertise through Craigslist. I was a single female and used to get a lot of attention from guys in my younger days. I used to have both guys and gals showing an interest in the room and property. Most guys would make inappropriate comments about living together and ended up together amongst other seedy comments. I would generally just laugh it off, and on most occasions wouldn't hear from them again to secure the room. I didn't live in the most central of places, so most potential lodgers would have to travel for work or recreational purposes. I had this one guy called Martin come to check the room, and as he was looking around, he made a series of inappropriate comments like, "Maybe we'll end up together, and we could share a room and keep this one as a spare." He even asked to see my room, which I told him was off limits. This guy was a total creep, and really made me feel uncomfortable. I really didn't like the guy. He was scruffy, with a tear in his jacket. He smelled like he smoked 40 a day, never brushed his teeth, and clearly hadn't washed in weeks. Maybe he was homeless or going through a bad patch. However, manners and decency don't cost a thing. I told him the room was $800 per month, plus bills, to try and deter him from wanting the room. He looked at me and paused for a minute with this longing glare. In my nervousness, I realized that I'd included the price on the Craigslist ad. Usually I would put price negotiable, but I had listed it for $400 as I was getting pretty desperate for the money. At this point, I just wanted the guy gone, as he was making me feel really uncomfortable, and I was starting to feel unsafe in my own home. I told him I forgot I listed it for $400 and said if he was interested he would need to fill some forms out for vetting and credit checks, and that this was standard procedure. "Sure, no problem," he said. He filled out an application form and paid the vetting fees in cash. I didn't know what to do. I really didn't want this guy in my house, and I felt too vulnerable to tell him while we were alone. I didn't want to take the money, but I thought to myself, if I just got him out of the house, I'll deal with whatever happens later and return his money to him. He eventually left and looked me up and down as we walked out of the door. I can't wait for us to live together. This guy seriously gave me the creeps. I was so relieved when he left. I locked my door and just got on with my day the best I could. That night as I was going to bed, I heard a kind of scratching sound coming from outside. I wasn't sure if this was something being dragged along the floor or along the side of my house. I made sure all the curtains were closed and turned off the lights. The scratching lasted for about 10 minutes, and I remember thinking it was maybe just a wild deer or something. A couple of days later, and quite late into the evening, Martin called me asking if I had an update on his application. I told him it was unsuccessful, and without giving me an opportunity to explain, Martin started shouting at me, calling me a liar. I was lost for words and stuttered that I wasn't lying and had no reason to lie. I offered the money back for his application. There was a moment's silence while I could hear Martin breathing heavily down the phone. "I'm coming to collect." He then hung up the phone. I was scared, like more scared than I've ever been in my life. I locked all the doors, pulled all the curtains, and turned off the lights. I thought about calling the police, but there wasn't any evidence that he was a threat, other than me not liking his vibe. I wasn't even sure when he was coming, right then and there. I sat in the dark with my cover wrapped around me to hide the light casting from my phone, and that's when I heard it. The same scratching sound I heard a couple of nights earlier. It was moving from one side of the house to the other. I couldn't tell if it was inside the house or outside. Then there was silence. "Open up, I know you're in there." He was at my bedroom window. I just stayed where I was, motionless with fright. He continued to move around my house, scratching whatever it was he was dragging around with him. Eventually I heard the scratching sound start to move away from the house and make its way into the distance. I gave it 10 minutes before deciding to look out my window. I jumped back with fright as Martin had his face pressed up against my bedroom window. I asked him to leave and told him I would wire him the money. He grinned at me before walking away. I never saw or heard from Martin again, but for about 6 months after this happened, I would occasionally hear the same scratching sound making its way around my house. A few years ago, Sheila, who was a close friend of mine, was down on her luck. She had recently lost both her husband and her job. She was in a state of depression, but this woman was like a diamond in the rough, and no matter how bad things were, she always put on a brave face for her 2 children and never let them see her pain. We were talking one day last fall, and with Christmas slowly approaching, Sheila burst out into tears because she didn't think she would be able to make Christmas happen this particular year. I was staying with her and tried to keep her as positive as I could to help and let her know she wasn't alone. I suggested she sell a few items that she didn't use anymore. It would be a great way to have a declutter and make some money in the process. Sheila reluctantly agreed, and I told her I would help her upload them to Craigslist, among other seller websites, and see if we could make Christmas special this year. Sheila has 2 beautiful children, and I know she didn't want to disappoint them, and being a good mother, agreed to sell off some of her and her late husband's possessions. She took photos of everything from garden furniture to DIY tools to fishing gear, and in particular, a really nice solid oak table she had in the main living area. She received several calls, and people came to view the listed items. Many were sold, and Sheila was feeling a lot more positive about the whole Christmas situation, and I saw something in her that I hadn't seen in a while. She had a sparkle of life in her that she knew everything was going to be okay. After about a week, Sheila received a call about the table we had listed. It was listed for $1,000, so there hadn't been much interest in it overall. A man who introduced himself as Derek called and asked if the table was still available, and said he would pay the asking price, no questions asked, if she would reserve it for him. He said he worked late, so it would likely be after dark when he came. Now, Sheila was in a bad place at the time, and the sale of this table made all the difference to the kind of Christmas they were going to have, so she agreed that he could come to collect the table any time, and just to call in advance. I wasn't with Sheila on the night the call came in, but Derek called and said he was on his way and would likely be there just after 9 p.m. When Derek arrived, he didn't pull his pickup into the drive, but instead parked it at the bottom of the drive, which was strange in itself, but Sheila didn't think anything of it at the time. He walked up the path and knocked on the door to be met by Sheila and asked if he could step inside to see the table. Sheila noticed 2 men standing by the gate at the bottom of the drive. "Are they with you?" Sheila asked. Yeah, they're here to help me move the table. I'll call them in once I've seen it." Sheila told me that she felt safer this way than just allowing 3 men into her home, but was still weary of the situation. Now, when talking to Derek on the phone, Derek was adamant that he wanted the table. He was so sure, and Sheila had even said to me that she thought that maybe she was missing something, and the table was worth a whole lot more than what she was selling it for, but she was willing to let that go for a Christmas her children deserved. Derek spent a lot of time looking at the table, checking for scratches, damage, and just asking lots and lots of unrelated questions. As they were mid-conversation, Derek's phone vibrated. He looked at his phone and said he would need to speak to his wife first, as it was for her, as a gift, and said he needed to go. Sheila offered to knock $200 off the price, but Derek had just lost complete interest. She showed him to the door and noticed his 2 friends were nowhere to be seen. He walked down the drive and got in the passenger side door, and the pickup drove off. I remember Sheila telling me that something in her gut just didn't feel right. Something was wrong. Sheila checked the kids' room, and both were sleeping in bed. Nothing appeared to be out of the ordinary, and that's when she realized. Bruno, the family dog, was nowhere to be found. Sheila called me, and I came straight home and we searched for him everywhere. We searched the house, the garden, the street, and even his usual walking route, and he was nowhere to be found. Sheila was shaking, and I remember having to calm her down. Sheila's husband had CCTV installed around the house, and more importantly, down on the gateposts at the bottom of the drive. He was always paranoid, but more so about the kids playing in the garden. While Derek, if that was even his real name, was in the house looking at the table, he was actually the distraction, or decoy if you will. Once inside, the two other men came up the drive and went around to the back door, which was unlocked. They took Bruno from his bed and put him in the car. We assumed that once they were done, that's who texted Derek, which explains why he left so abruptly. We called the police, and they came to gather the footage and a statement of what happened. Sheila was mortified. Bruno was a beloved family pet that the children had throughout their entire childhood. After reviewing the home CCTV system, we found an unclear image of the back of the car and license plate. We thought maybe the police would have some enhancement software and maybe zoom in and clear it up enough to read. 3 weeks went by and we heard nothing. On the morning of Christmas Eve, Sheila received a phone call from the police. They had managed to locate the car and upon visiting the home address, found 7 dogs that had been reported missing, including Bruno. The police wouldn't divulge a lot of information to us at the time, but said these guys were professionals. They had been watching the house and had photos of the house, Bruno, and even the children found on one of their phones. We were able to go collect him later that day, and Sheila, the children, and even myself were all ecstatic to have Bruno back. Nothing is more important at Christmas than family, and Bruno was family. We gave all the evidence we had to the police, including the pictures we had listed of the table. When looking at these, there was something we noticed which we hadn't noticed before. Bruno was in the background of one of the photos. This happened a few years ago, but it still brings a sickness to my stomach when I think about it. I had just moved to a new town where I purchased a house with a rather large inheritance I received and needed to obtain some day-to-day household items. You know, things like a washing machine, refrigerator, TV, those kinds of things. I used Craigslist regularly and never had any issues with anyone I ever came across, whether it be buying, selling, or even dating. I bought my white goods from the local retail depot. Those are the things I like to buy new, as you don't really know how people have looked after and cared for the appliances. With televisions, it's more just of an age thing. How many ways can you misuse a television? If you're willing to get past it not being the latest flagship model, you can usually get a pretty good deal. I found a Sony OLED TV that was only 6 months old and for a reasonable price. It was $1,000 secondhand, but to buy it new would cost me over $2,000 easy. The seller lived in the next town over, but it was only about an hour's drive from my house. I sent the seller a message and asked a few questions about its condition to make sure there was nothing I was missing, like it being a parts-only sale. The guy sent me a few videos of the TV working and even showed the time and date up on the screen so I knew it was legit. I asked if he could save it for me until I could drive over in a few days' time and explained I was in the next town over, but I definitely wanted it and would even wire a deposit. My phone started to ring. Hello? Hey, it's Dylan. I'm actually passing through your town tomorrow evening. I'm going out of town for a week or so, but I can drop the TV off for you if it helps you out. I was a bit weary, but he did say I could set it all up to make sure it worked before handing over any cash. I reluctantly agreed. Sure, I'll send you my address. The next night, I was arranging my furniture, waiting for Dylan to arrive with my new TV, when my phone started ringing. Hey, it's Dylan. I've broken down on the avenue just past the old country club. I'm about to call roadside to take me home, but thought you might want to come and get the TV while I'm here. The country club was only about a 10-minute drive from my house, so I said I would come and meet him and would leave straight away. I set off driving and passed the country club. I saw no sign of Dylan, so continued to drive for about 5 to 10 kilometers when I saw a truck pulled over to the side of the road. I slowly drove past but couldn't see anyone inside. There were no streetlights, and the road had woodland on either side, making it extremely dark. I parked up just behind the truck, but I wasn't even sure if this was Dylan. I tried Dylan's number, but the call wouldn't connect. It said the number was out of service. The whole situation didn't feel right. I could feel it in my gut. I wound my window down slightly to check if I could see or hear anything. I heard someone shouting my name from the darkness of the trees.
Kyle, hey Kyle, it's Dylan. I've fallen over trying to take a piss and hurt my ankle. Can you come here and help me?
I felt a sigh of relief come over me. I got out of my car and started to walk over towards where Dylan's voice was coming from. As I walked over to the side of the road, I stood there looking into the trees, not really able to see anything.
Hey, Dylan, are you there?
There was no response. I heard a noise behind me. As I turned around, I was hit in the face with something. I'm not sure what it was, but it knocked me to the ground. I'm pretty sure it knocked me out momentarily. I looked towards my car and saw one man climbing into my car and two men climbing into the truck. They were wearing masks or facial covers of some kind, so I couldn't really see what they looked like. Dylan had lured me there, knowing I would be carrying cash for the TV, and then he and his buddies, or whoever they were, not only took my money, they drove away with my car too. It took me close to an hour to walk to the country club, where I called the police. By this time, they were long gone with my car and my money.